When we talk about energy, most people think in terms of physical strength or emotional stamina. But in neuroscience, energy begins with attention. Where you place your attention determines where your neural resources are directed. Attention is not a vague mental concept. It's a real biological process. When you focus on something, specific neural circuits in your brain become active. Blood flow increases to those areas. Neurons fire in synchronized patterns. That's not abstract. That's metabolic energy being used in real time. The human brain accounts for only about 2% of total body mass, but consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy. That tells us something important. Cognition is expensive. Attention is expensive. And like any expensive resource, it must be allocated wisely. If your attention is scattered, moving constantly from one notification to the next, from social media to email to background noise, then your energy is being fragmented. You feel tired, depleted, unable to move forward in a meaningful way, not because you're doing too much, but because you're splitting your energy too thinly across too many things that don't matter. Now, what's actually happening in the brain when this occurs? The frontal lobes, particularly the prefrontal cortex, are responsible for goal-directed attention. They help suppress irrelevant stimuli and maintain focus on the task at hand. But when we're constantly shifting attention, those same circuits are put under strain. The brain must reset and reorient every time your focus shifts. That process consumes even more energy. We call this the switching cost. It's not just a psychological inconvenience, it's a biological drain. Let's go one step further. Attention shapes perception. The thalamus acts like a gatekeeper in the brain, regulating what sensory information is allowed into conscious awareness. It doesn't let everything in, it prioritizes what you're paying attention to. So what you notice, what seems important to you, is determined by where your attention is. And that means your entire reality is filtered through the lens of focus. You are not just using energy. When you focus, you are creating your experience of the world. Most people don't lose their energy because they're physically overworked. They lose it because they're mentally overstimulated. They're feeding their attention to low-quality inputs, gossip, algorithm-driven outrage, noise disguised as news. This drains dopamine and diminishes the brain's capacity for motivation. Dopamine is not just about pleasure, it's about drive and direction. And attention is the steering wheel for that drive. When you let your attention be hijacked, your energy follows. You feel exhausted not because you're doing too much, but because you're not directing your energy with precision. One way to reclaim your energy is to become more intentional with your attention. That means eliminating passive consumption. It means building in structured blocks of deep work. It means guarding the first 30 minutes of your morning, not just from technology, but from mental clutter. The first 30 minutes after waking are when the brain is most neuroplastic, most sensitive to inputs. Where your attention goes during that window sets the tone for your nervous system for the rest of the day. There's also a physiological basis to all of this. When we focus, we activate the locus coeruleus in the brainstem, which releases norepinephrine, a neuromodulator that sharpens awareness. This is your body preparing you to engage. The pupils dilate. The heart rate subtly shifts. Glucose is mobilized. That's not a metaphor. That's your biology aligning with your focus. It's energy being mobilized in service of what you're paying attention to. Now, consider the inverse. When attention is diffuse, when the brain is stuck in what we call default mode, energy becomes unfocused. The body lacks alignment. There is internal noise. You begin to feel anxious, restless, distracted. Not because something is wrong, but because your energy lacks a direction. Energy without attention is chaos. Attention without clarity is wasted fuel. But when the two are aligned, when your attention is clear and deliberate, your energy becomes ordered, powerful, and sustainable. You are not born with a fixed amount of usable energy each day. You shape it. You shape it with your inputs, your routines, and most importantly, your attention. When you start treating attention like currency, something finite and valuable, you begin to invest it wisely. You stop giving it away for free. You stop letting it be stolen. And you start reclaiming your energy, not by doing more, but by doing less, more precisely. Focus is not just a mindset or motivational idea. It's a biological process. It's built into the structure and chemistry of the human brain. And like any biological process, it can be trained, disrupted, enhanced, or depleted. Understanding the biology of focus gives you an edge. It gives you a map to navigate your own cognitive performance. At the center of this process is the prefrontal cortex, a region located just behind the forehead. This area is responsible for what neuroscientists call top-down control. That means it can suppress distractions, inhibit impulses, and maintain sustained attention on a task or goal. It does this by interacting with multiple brain systems, especially those involved in motivation, emotion, and memory. Focus is not one single function. It's the result of coordination between multiple networks. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex plays a key role in working memory, keeping relevant information active while you're concentrating. The anterior cingulate cortex monitors for conflict and errors, helping you redirect attention when it wanders. The parietal cortex helps with spatial and visual attention. It's what allows you to focus on a specific location or object in your environment. All of this neural coordination relies on neurochemical systems. Two of the most important chemicals involved in focus are dopamine and norepinephrine. Dopamine is a neuromodulator that influences motivation and reward. It helps you stay engaged in a task by signaling that what you're doing is meaningful or will lead to a desirable outcome. Norepinephrine, on the other hand, is more about alertness. It increases the signal-to-noise ratio in the brain. In simple terms, it enhances the salience of important information and suppresses irrelevant background noise. When you sit down to do focused work, your brain is entering what we might call a task engagement state. This is not passive. It's a metabolically demanding state that requires deliberate energy allocation. Your autonomic nervous system shifts into a mode of calm alertness, increased readiness without excess stress. Ideally, this state is accompanied by rhythmic activation in the beta frequency range of brain waves, particularly over the frontal lobes. These beta oscillations are associated with goal-directed thought and problem solving, but maintaining this state is not automatic. It's influenced by your internal state, how well you slept, your blood glucose levels, your level of physical movement, even your gut microbiome. Sleep deprivation, for instance, has a direct impact on the prefrontal cortex. Even one night of poor sleep can reduce activity in this region, making it significantly harder to concentrate, filter distractions, or resist impulses. Similarly, glucose, the brain's primary energy source, plays a direct role in cognitive control. Low blood sugar can impair focus, so can dehydration. Focus also depends on your ability to switch between mental states. You don't stay focused by pushing through distractions indefinitely. You stay focused by managing when and how you focus. The brain has a default mode network, a set of regions that becomes active when you're not focused on a specific task. It's where mind-wandering, self-reflection, and imagination occur. Too much activity in this network during work will pull you out of focus. But the right balance, moving between task synchronous states and short restorative breaks, actually improves long-term concentration. One powerful tool for this is visual anchoring. The neural circuitry for focus is closely linked to the visual system. Where you direct your gaze influences your state of attention. When you hold your gaze steady on a single point, a screen, a page, a fixed object, your neural circuits begin to synchronize with that fixed point. This leads to increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and a reduction in noise from surrounding brain regions. That's not abstract. It's a measurable physiological shift in how your brain is processing information. Another layer is the role of movement and posture. The vestibular system, which helps you balance and orient in space, communicates directly with the brain regions responsible for attention. This is why standing, walking, or even changing your physical position can reset focus. It's not just about comfort, it's about engaging the sensory systems that support cognitive clarity. Your body is not separate from your brain when it comes to attention. It is part of the system. Even the timing of your focus matters. Human alertness follows a circadian rhythm, governed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus. Most people have peaks in focus 1-3 hours after waking and again in the mid-afternoon. Trying to force high focus work during low cortisol windows leads to frustration and poor outcomes, not because of lack of discipline, but because the biological systems supporting focus are not optimally engaged at that time. There's a persistent myth that taking time to focus on yourself is a form of selfishness, that by prioritizing your own needs, routines, or personal development, you're neglecting others. But from a biological and psychological perspective, the opposite is true. Focusing on yourself is what equips you to show up in a sustainable, high-performing way, not just for yourself, but for the people and responsibilities that matter most. The nervous system doesn't operate in a vacuum. It requires structure, regulation, and recovery to perform at its highest level. And those processes begin with self-awarenesses, which is a direct product of self-focus. When you regularly check in with your internal state, your energy levels, emotional tone, cognitive clarity, you begin to regulate the systems that keep your performance consistent over time. You begin to intervene early when stress is building. You become more accurate in assessing when to push forward and when to pause. From a neurobiological standpoint, self-focus activates parts of the medial prefrontal cortex, a region involved in introspection and self-referential thinking. This is not the same as being self-absorbed or narcissistic. It's a mode of thinking that allows you to reflect on goals, monitor progress, and evaluate behaviors in alignment with long-term outcomes. This is the foundation of growth. It's also how you build resilience, because you start developing internal cues for recovery before you collapse into burnout. Self-focus also helps recalibrate the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic system is responsible for drive, alertness, and stress responses. It gets you into action. But it's the parasympathetic system, particularly through the vagus nerve, that supports recovery, digestion, immune function, and calm. When you spend time focusing inward through breath work, journaling, controlled movement, or even mindful stillness, you activate this parasympathetic branch. That physiological shift is not abstract. It can be measured in heart rate variability, cortisol levels, and even inflammatory markers. People often say they can't afford to focus on themselves, that others depend on them, that work won't wait, that life is too demanding. But the longer you delay tuning into your own needs, the more those external demands begin to suffer. That's not philosophy, it's systems failure. A dysregulated individual trying to regulate their world spreads stress, disconnection, and inconsistency. A regulated individual who has taken the time to focus inward, to know their thresholds, manage their inputs, and clarify their intentions brings coherence and clarity into every room they enter. One of the most misunderstood aspects of human performance is that your value doesn't come from always doing. It comes from being aligned physically, mentally, emotionally. Alignment requires, and awareness requires space. You cannot create space without deliberately withdrawing your attention from external chaos and turning it inward, even briefly. This doesn't mean shutting the world out. It means organizing your inner world so that when you do engage, it's from a place of strength, not reaction. Self-focus also improves decision-making. The insula, a region deep within the brain, is responsible for interoception, your brain's ability to sense internal bodily states. When this system is well calibrated, you make faster, more intuitive decisions because your body is giving you accurate real-time data. You know when something is right or wrong, not based on abstract logic alone, but based on alignment between internal and external cues. That's a skill, it's trainable, but it only develops when you give yourself permission to look inward without guilt. Culturally, many people associate self-focus with weakness or indulgence, but high performers across domains, elite athletes, special operators, scientists, creators, build structured self-focus into their daily rhythms. They know it's not a luxury, it's part of preparation. They use solitude not as a withdrawal from responsibility, but as a rehearsal for effectiveness. This time is where plans are made, nervous systems are reset, and clarity is restored. Even the quality of your relationships improves when you've prioritized self-focus. The mirror neuron system, which helps us empathize and connect with others, functions more accurately when we ourselves are regulated. In other words, you can't co-regulate with someone, a child, a partner, a team, if your own system is fragmented. Emotional contagion is real. If you carry chaos, you spread it. If you carry clarity, you project it. And clarity begins with the willingness to pay attention to your internal environment. What many people interpret as selfishness is often just healthy boundary setting. When you say no to protect your time, your energy, your focus, you're not turning away from others, you're turning toward alignment. And alignment is what allows your presence to have real weight when it's needed most. Focus is not just about what you pay attention to, it's also about what you deliberately tune out. The modern world is saturated with stimuli, each competing for a slice of your cognitive bandwidth. Every ping, every scroll, every piece of unsolicited input comes at a neurological cost. The human nervous system evolved in an environment where information was sparse and mostly relevant. Today, we're living in a radically different environment. And to thrive in it, we need to be selective. We need to remove external noise. Noise isn't just sound. In neuroscience, noise refers to any irrelevant signal that interferes with perception, decision-making, or performance. This can be auditory, visual, informational, or emotional. It's the email that interrupts your train of thought. It's the background chatter while you're trying to work. It's the algorithmically engineered outrage embedded in your social media feed. Every one of these inputs competes with the task-relevant signals your brain is trying to focus on. The prefrontal cortex is the region responsible for filtering these signals. It acts like a spotlight, selecting one stream of input to prioritize while suppressing others. But this filtering system has limits. It's metabolically expensive. Every time the brain is forced to sort signal from noise, it uses glucose, oxygen, and neurotransmitters. That's energy you no longer have for deep work, strategic thinking, or creative insight. What feels like mental fatigue is often the product of too many irrelevant inputs, forcing your brain to engage in constant filtering. From a sensory perspective, noise directly alters the state of your nervous system. Unexpected sounds or flashing notifications activate the locus ceruleus, a brainstem structure that releases While norepinephrine can be useful in short bursts, chronic activation leads to restlessness, irritability, and impaired focus. It puts your system into a low-grade fight or flight mode, even if you're just sitting at your desk. The problem is compounded by digital environments. Social media, streaming platforms, and multitasking apps are designed to hijack attention. They rely on dopamine prediction error, the brain's natural response to novelty and intermittent reward. When you get a notification, there's a spike in dopamine, not because the content is valuable, but because the brain anticipates that it might be. This intermittent reinforcement loop is biologically hard to resist, and over time, it erodes the neural circuits required for sustained focus. One of the most effective strategies for regaining clarity is environmental control. This means actively shaping your surroundings to reduce unnecessary inputs. Silence your phone, use noise-canceling headphones, turn off non-essential notifications, work in a space that minimizes visual clutter. Each of these steps decreases the demand on your filtering systems and frees up cognitive resources for the work that actually matters. Even brief exposure to noisy environments impacts cognition. Research shows that working in a space with unpredictable background noise, like an open office or cafe, can reduce performance on memory and problem-solving tasks by as much as 20–30%. The reason? The brain is constantly shifting between the external distractions and the internal task. This is called attentional capture, and it's largely unconscious. You don't feel it happening, but your output suffers. External noise isn't limited to physical or digital input. It also includes social and emotional noise, the expectations, judgments, and comparisons that bombard you from others. When you're constantly tuned into what other people are doing, thinking, or achieving, you're operating from a reactive state. Your energy gets directed toward maintaining status, approval, or relevance, rather than progress, learning, or fulfillment. This activates the default mode network in the brain, the same system involved in self-referential thinking and rumination. High activity in this network is associated with anxiety and decreased task engagement. Removing external noise is not about isolation, it's about filtration. It's about choosing inputs that align with your goals, values, and biology. The auditory system, the visual system, the attentional networks, all of these can be trained to operate with greater selectivity. But that training begins with awareness. It begins with understanding that just because something is available to your senses doesn't mean it deserves your attention. Attention is not passive. It's an active, energy-intensive process that requires protection and boundaries. Certain rituals help reset the nervous system after exposure to noise. Visual anchoring, staring at a single non-stimulating point, can reduce neural chatter. Breath work, especially long exhalations, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, shifting the body out of alertness and into regulation. Even walking outdoors without a phone, known as optic flow exposure, has been shown to reduce overactivation in the amygdala and restore mental clarity. These are not luxuries. They are biological tools for recovery. The quality of your focus depends on the quality of your inputs. And most of what comes at you each day is not designed to serve your goals. It's designed to capture your attention for someone else's agenda. Until you start removing that noise, your cognitive system is not operating at full capacity. Progress isn't a product of occasional bursts of motivation. It's the result of consistent, intentional daily practice. The nervous system changes over time through repetition. This principle is known as experience-dependent plasticity, the idea that what you repeatedly do shapes the structure and function of your brain. Whether you're training attention, discipline, physical skill, or emotional regulation, the key variable is consistency paired with intention. Intentional practice is different from routine habit. Habits can be automatic. Practice requires presence. It's not about just showing up. It's about showing up with awareness of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it connects to a larger goal. That level of attention engages the prefrontal cortex, strengthening circuits involved in executive function, planning, decision-making, and goal tracking. When you move through your day on autopilot, those circuits weaken. But when you train with intention, you're literally rewiring your brain for long-term focus and resilience. Neuroscience research shows that repetition alone doesn't lead to optimal learning or adaptation. What matters is deliberate practice, engaging in focused effort just beyond your current abilities while receiving feedback and adjusting accordingly. That kind of practice activates the anterior cingulate cortex, a region involved in monitoring conflict, correcting errors, and guiding behavior change. It also recruits the dopaminergic system, which reinforces behaviors that lead to progress or reward. Dopamine plays a crucial role here. It's not just a pleasure chemical, it's a chemical of motivation and learning. When you complete a task you've set for yourself, even a small one, dopamine is released in the brain, particularly in the mesolimbic pathway. This reinforces the behavior, making it more likely to be repeated. But if your daily actions are not aligned with your internal goals, that reinforcement loop doesn't build momentum. It creates fragmentation. That's why intention matters. It aligns your physiology with your direction. One of the most overlooked aspects of practice is timing. The brain and body operate on a circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle that affects hormone levels, body temperature, alertness, and mood. Intentionally aligning your daily practice with these rhythms enhances learning and recovery. For example, high-focus cognitive work tends to be more effective within the first 4-6 hours after waking, when cortisol and adrenaline levels support heightened alertness. Physical skill acquisition, on the other hand, may benefit from late afternoon sessions, when motor coordination and reaction time peak. A daily practice doesn't have to be elaborate. What matters is that it's specific, measurable, and linked to identity. When you repeatedly act in alignment with who you want to become, those actions feed back into your sense of self. This is called identity-based behavior change, a psychological mechanism that is supported by neural pathways in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is involved in self-evaluation. In simple terms, the brain starts to believe you are the type of person who does what you repeatedly do. Intentional practice also changes how your brain prioritizes information. The reticular activating system, a network in the brainstem, filters sensory input based on what it deems relevant. If you begin each day by setting an intention or reviewing your goals, that system begins to bias your attention toward information, opportunities, and behaviors that align with that goal. You see more of what you're training your brain to care about. This is not metaphysical, it's attentional tuning at the neurological level. Rituals help reinforce this. When you repeat a specific action at the same time and in the same context, you create context-dependent memory. Over time, simply entering that context, a certain chair, a time of day, a piece of music, triggers the neural pathways associated with the task. This is the biological basis of momentum. You're not relying on motivation, you're relying on neural efficiency. The system becomes primed to enter the work state, the reflective state, or the training state, based on pattern recognition encoded through repetition. Even small, low-effort practices compound over time. 5 minutes of breath work, 10 minutes of journaling, 1 cold exposure, 1 difficult conversation you choose to initiate. Each of these practices, when done with intention, becomes a vote for your future self. They influence neurochemistry, regulate emotional tone, build stress tolerance, and strengthen the pathways for agency. Crucially, intentional daily practice changes your relationship to discomfort. The brain's insula and anterior cingulate cortex are involved in processing pain, both physical and emotional. When you engage consistently with challenge, voluntarily, on your terms, these regions become more adaptive. You develop greater emotional granularity. You become more precise in your response to internal resistance and less reactive to external obstacles. That's resilience. And it's trainable, but only through repeated engagement with effortful, meaningful tasks. Human beings are biologically wired for connection. From the moment we're born, our nervous systems are shaped not just by our own internal states, but by the energy, the presence, tone, and regulation of those around us. This is not metaphorical, it's physiological. Energy is contagious because our brains are designed to mirror and respond to the emotional and behavioral cues of others through systems like mirror neurons, autonomic co-regulation, and limbic resonance. Let's start with the mirror neuron system. a group of specialized neurons found in the premotor cortex and parietal lobes. These neurons activate both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that same action. This system is thought to be involved in imitation, learning, empathy, and social understanding. When you see someone experiencing joy, frustration, or calm, your brain echoes their state. You don't even have to think about it. Your system aligns, even subtly, with theirs. That's why a single person's emotional tone can elevate or deflate an entire group. This is also why being around someone who is agitated, chaotic, or perpetually negative can drain your cognitive resources. Your brain isn't just observing their behavior, it's simulating it, activating neural pathways that create internal tension. The amygdala, responsible for processing emotional intensity, can become overactive in environments filled with negative affect. This triggers a cascade of stress responses: elevated cortisol, shallow breathing, narrowed focus. It's not just unpleasant, it impairs your ability to think clearly, regulate emotion, and perform under pressure. On the other hand, regulated, focused, and purposeful energy has the opposite effect, as it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, calming the body, increasing heart rate variability, and improving access to the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, reasoning, and long-term planning. That's why, when you're in the presence of someone who is deeply grounded, your own system begins to stabilize. It's not about charisma or personality. It's about nervous system regulation and the subtle cues your body picks up on automatically. Energy is also transmitted through nonverbal communication: posture, tone of voice, eye contact, breathing rhythm. These cues are processed by your superior temporal sulcus, a part of the brain involved in detecting intention and meaning in movement. You can sense when someone is walking into a room with purpose, even if they don't say a word. You can feel when someone is hiding tension beneath a smile. Your brain is decoding these signals constantly, whether or not you're conscious of it. This transmission of energy happens in both directions. You're not just receiving input, you're also broadcasting. Every day, your internal state influences your external impact. If you're dysregulated, distracted, or depleted, that energy leaks into your environment. If you're focused, clear, and coherent, that state projects outward and influences others. Leadership, influence,